Present our speaker today. We have Bernie Aho, who is a product leader, founder, and as I said, a mentor. Bernie is a senior product leader and entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience building, scaling, and operating technology companies. He is currently a group product manager at Thinkific, where he works on enterprise and platform scale products that help large organizations manage learning, content, and operations at scale. He is deeply involved in sports performance and safety as a founder and product leader at Kinmetrix, a sports technology company focused on data-driven neck strength training and athlete performance. In parallel, Bernie is also the CEO and co-founder of Critiq, a platform that enables people to improve real-world skills through personalized expert video feedback. Finally, he's also a mentor at NORCAT Innovation Mill, supporting early-stage founders with product strategy, UX, and go-to-market execution. His focus and what he's really good at is the product strategy and development, user experience and product design, enterprise and platform products, business and go-to-market strategy, and mobile and web applications. He's going to take us on a journey of finding out, is your business idea going to work? And how can we test it to make sure it will before we put in all the time and money and effort? With that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay? All good? Yeah, you can hear me, Rafi?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So let me just share my screen.
While Bernie gets set up, if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat and I will ask them all to Bernie after his presentation while we do a bit of a Q&A. Take it away, Bernie.
Okay, is it my screen on? I don't see it on my window. That's okay.
Yeah, I see it on.
Okay. All right, perfect. Yeah, thanks everybody for attending. What I want to talk about today is the sort of this different stages and try and provide a framework for product validation. And sort of what we mean by that is sort of how do you understand and go through the processes of thinking about your business idea a little differently, and kind of go through that. But first, she did a great job of introducing myself, so I can skip through this part. But I think it's just important from a credibility standpoint, just so you know where I'm coming from and why some of this matters. So one of the companies I started a couple of years ago, it started out of Sudbury, was a company called Concept Share, and it grew pretty well and was acquired in 2018. It scaled to 55 employees, mostly out of Ottawa. Worked with some of the best companies in the world, but it started with an idea that we were just doing with my co-founders and I, just out of a Tim Hortons. So it started on their cocktail napkin and scaled to a really big company that did really well for our investors. And after that, I sort of did another company, which was my first exposure to Silicon Valley, and that gave me investment, which gave me a different perspective on sort of like the things that you need early on from a startup standpoint, and sort of got better and better at that as we went on. And that was acquired in 2022. She mentioned one of the founders of Critiq, which is a personalized video format. Some of the investors include NBA All-Star, Nick Van Exel, and several others. So again, that was a great experience of taking what I learned from the previous startups and ideating really fast. So we built this in COVID and be able to get from concept to delivery within 6 months, to where it was an actual product that was generating real money. Kinmetrix is another company as well, more on the hardware side. And then my current position right now with Thinkific Labs, which is I'm helping them sort of bring in AI to their workplace. So when you think about sort of the startup curve, and this is something I've experienced, and I think it's something that what I'm hoping to get is the tools to sort of break out of this a little bit. But if you think about this scale where there's the enthusiasm of the entrepreneur, before you start up, you're just sort of normal. But then you get really, really excited by things, right? And you tell a few people and things are going, you're getting, your spouse might be in, your friends, everyone in that. But then it's like, once you start to really go forward with it and get into it, reality really sits in. And then it's sort of like, okay, now what am I doing and why doesn't anybody care? And, why isn't this selling or whatever it is, right? And there's a lot of parts, and everybody kind of goes through this. And I think it's just this is where the work is, and hopefully can really handle like this little part here. But then as the journey goes on, once you get through that, that's where a lot of the fun begins. Once you start seeing it working and start, applying some of these techniques through, then you get to some really nice places where you get to product market fit, which is just a fancy way of saying that you have the right product for the right market at the right price. And then as you sort of get better and better at that, with more and more people, that's sort of where your business goes. And this applies to everything. You're going to see like some examples like from a tech perspective, but I don't think any of this is applies just to technology companies. It's just ones that you see a little bit faster because it's easier to measure. And again, I'm a mentor with the business incubator as well as NORCAT. So a lot of this presentation was based off a lot of the things I hear from early people that we're talking to, a lot of the mentorees that are bringing their business things and what we're actually seeing a lot of, and it goes across all industries, is how people are using AI to help with this. And then how that can go wrong. And I'm going to touch a little bit on that today. And this is what it's sort of we're talking about, is sort of like the illusion of progress, right? As you're sort of working and you're very early on and you get really excited, you're asking AI if this is a good idea, that kind of thing. And you're getting a lot of interesting feedback, but it's like, it's really just pumping you up. And I think all of this is important. We just don't want to mistake that from, is really what we're trying to prevent people from, is idea of launching too early, or sort of like betting the farm too early before you really have that validation you need to know that is this even a good idea that people want, right? It's sort of that truth. And it's sort of like providing a framework of how we can get to that truth. Because you can do little things, and I think you see this a lot, like sending surveys, gathering feedback. All of this stuff is good, but a lot of it is confirmatory. It's sort of like telling you what you wanted to hear. And it's really tough to get a sense of everything, of what will actually move the needle. And so what I'm sort of presenting is the idea of like this being a discipline. It's not just a checkbox. It's really trying to figure out where your idea breaks, both at the conceptual level and then on the process level of how do you get it in front of customers. And the idea is to do it as early as possible before you heavily invest in it. And that's where I see a lot of people go wrong, where they're maybe quitting their jobs a little earlier than they need to, or any of those things. And so this is sort of like going to help you there. So what you see a lot of is sort of, if you get to this point where the real truth lies in, having a real person, like where your real customer is, and then that you actually have a real behavioral change so that you can observe something where they're actually doing something differently because of what you've done, and that you're solving a real problem. And I think if these things are true, this is where you can feel really good about sort of like investing. And this is going to happen again and again, because this will happen on price, this will happen on anyway. But right now, I think we're just talking about the core idea. And we think about like, it's not about proving that your idea is good. It's actually the opposite. It's actually trying to think about like finding out why it's wrong and fixing those parts, right? So it's trying to think of like, how can you put yourself in scenarios to get those answers really quickly, of like, where is the friction? Where are people not understanding something, or you're not getting the problem clearly, or you're not articulating the problem clearly, or your solution doesn't articulate the problem quickly. It's not just about sort of like looking to your friends to just nod and say, good job. Like that's a really cool thing, because it's really tough to, obviously believe everyone, that loves you. They're all trying to look the best for you. So it's like, how do you get past that, right? And sort of a way to look at this is like the idea of a filter of truth. It really starts, we call pre-social. And this is just yourself, right? Like, can you articulate, can you frame and give your concept in a way that makes sense before you ever get to lots of other people? Because if you don't get that right, it's going to make it really hard. And I think the first step of that, once you get past that, is a close social network, right? So finding out just from like your close friends, or just even social, like through a little bit of light market research, of that your idea is good. And then it kind of goes on, and we'll go through each one of these steps, but getting to MVP is sort of the goal. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is. But let's coming back to what we call stage 0, which is like just this idea of earliest validations possible. And so this is where I see some people using AI wrong, where they're just like, they just ask it, is it a good idea, right? And I think the idea is that like, it's probably going to always say yes, very, very closely. So it's like, well, how can we use AI then, or any sort of tools to make this easier. And what I like to do sometimes too is, as I have an idea and I'm sort of telling, if it's an AI or even somebody else, is like you want them to get it back, give it back to you. And so, in lack of sort of like, if you want to go fast, AI is really good for that, is that it'll say back to you what you said, which is good. And then sometimes even writing a long form article. And one of the tools that I've been recommending a lot for this part of the business, for this stage, is using this product Google called Google Notebook LLM, and it's ideally was invented to help learn, but we use it a lot is like get try and get a long format explanation. What sometimes I do is get like ChatGPT or whatever your tools of choice to sort of write a 3,000 word article, Forbes article, or something that's specific to your trade, and take something like that, which has all the information that you've told it about your concept. And then if you throw it in Notebook LLM, you can actually get a podcast back, which is like an actual, like, feels like it's two people genuinely recorded a podcast. And I find that's really useful to hear them talk about your idea. And this is like your first time of hearing people talk about it. Yeah, they're fake, but they do actually challenge a lot of the ideas that you've said, and you can find gaps. And you're like, if they say it back to you in a way and it doesn't resonate, we're like, well, that's not how I would have explained it. Well, then that's something you can get better and better at, is like sort of how do you be more clear on your idea. And I think you need that to get to the next step. And the next step is the idea of taking that one step further, right? So it's like, how do you get your pitch down, right? And I think that's a big part, because again, if you don't get this part right, if it's too hard to explain it, you're just going to have like fuzziness over anyone's eyes when you look at it. So framing the idea and the problem, I think, is key. So that's a good use, again, of ABI, just to help throw everything in that you're talking about, get it to do, see if it resonates with you, and then use that to start talking to people with, and getting that done as quick as possible. And then the second part is sort of like the idea of market validation. And there's a lot of like normal, this is outside of market research that, you should probably do already, which is the idea of, there's X number of moms in the Sudbury area or X number, whatever, right? So that's sort of like real market data that you need to do. But what I'm talking about more is like, who actually has your problem? So who actually, do you have support that, because the product may not exist that you're working on. So it's like, could you, where's the best place to go to? And a lot of people who found on the internet know they go to like places where the public are genuinely complaining about things like Reddit and Twitter, public forums, anything like that. TikTok, YouTube, usually in the gold is in the comment sections, but finding the what they're talking about is a good place to do it. And then you can actually get really creative with a few Google searches to sort of take that to the next level. Even following creators that you're using that same thing to go there, that's key. And then I've actually turned this into, again, I don't want to get too technical here, but just as an idea, and I don't recommend this for everyone, but I think this is something that I've actually experienced really great, which is the idea of going a little bit further in those comments. So with a couple of Google searches, and think about like, how do we cluster those comments in a way that makes sense, that we can then interpret as real problems. And this is just a very creative way of not spending a lot of money, but getting a lot of market data up about a real problem. So one of the products that I was working on, I found one TikTok on one Instagram that was really talking about like this idea of the mental load. They're just both like sort of like, cleverly sort of saying something about that. And what we noticed is like there's a huge amount of traffic in there in comments, and the gold was in there. People, agreeing with it or saying their own certain use case about that. And so it's like, well, how do we get that out? Because there's like 20,000 comments. And so just a couple of Google searches, there's a tool called Amplify that I didn't know about prior to doing this, where you can actually take both of those feeds and it will go and grab all of those comments and put it in a nice, CSV that I can bring into Google Sheets or whatever, or throw right into an AI format that will give you the sentiment and give you basically build that problem and then check that against your thing. So it was a good way to where it's like, how do you get real good raw information without sort of having to work too hard? And that's kind of gets into the idea of like structured market testing. And this is at this stage, this is where we really want to see like, what is the earliest that commitment we can get where we don't have to do the full solution. And in tech, it's a little bit easier than other products, but at the same time, it's still the idea of having something, even if it's a prototype or something that you can get that part. But if you, even if it's an idea, like that's even non-technical, but you can, everybody needs a website. But if you have a website and you could talk a little bit about it, or a few social posts where it's like sign up to learn more, or sign up to know when we launch. These are like really easy experiments that you can do where if you're really good from those earlier steps at sort of articulating the problem, articulating the your solution to it and your concept, throwing that up somewhere where people can view it and seeing if people will take that small action, which is just to put in their email or just sign up for something or to like a post. This is a good indicator of sort of like that first man. And then if you can think of more ways, again and again, to think of like, what is a little commitment can mean? Can they RSVP to a Facebook event where there's, anything where you can get that? And I think those are really helpful and a great indicator that you're in the right place. And if it's the same is true, if it's not going well, that you can make adjustments until it does go well. And you can spend a lot of time here just sort of refining a basic web page or a wait list. Or what even furthers this is you see this a lot on not GoFundMe's, but the those products that you can buy really, really early, right? Where you can make a video concept and they're basically sort of investing in that concept. And that's the same idea. Is like you can do that where it's like the founder's just talking about it, but the idea is like get them to watch it, right? And if they're not watching it, okay, maybe you need to make a new one or refine your pitch. And all of this time before you've actually invested in doing anything or, again, having to switch jobs or do anything like that. So those are the next stage, but those are really easy. If you jump into this right away without sort of thinking of those previous steps, you probably won't have a great idea of your problem and you won't have a great idea of how to articulate your solution. The stage 4 is sort of like the willingness to pay. So once you get past that part and you feel really, really good, now it's a question of, well, is your solution, right? They understand the problem. You probably you're getting close to identifying the market and who to go after. And you have the concept, they've kind of bought into the concept, but like, is it your solution? Is your solution the one that's going to solve the problem, with your concept? And so that's sort of the idea, is thinking about how can you do that early, right? What's the earliest place you can go to get somebody to purchase something? And I think that's becomes a big signal. And I think what you really want to is not get really down if they're not. It's really dialing into to the no's and figuring out like why are they saying no, and trying to think about what you can change along that process to make it. And that's a very simple way. And I think it's before you go really big, and some people are, before they even go through this stage, they're ordering like 10,000 inventory of whatever widget they're selling. But I think it's like, if you want to do this early, even at sort of like find the right price, just see like, can you get to this next part? And if the other pieces are done, this stage could go easier, but you'll find out the friction. It could be pricing, it could be all of those things, but ideally you want to make sure that they can get to the product. You can worry about distribution, and then it gives you the next place to get to the next stage, right? And this is sort of where we talk about MVP. And MVP, for anyone that doesn't know, it's just a sort of term, is like the minimal viable product. What is the earliest thing you could build that you think somebody could buy and it will provide value? It doesn't mean it has, like, you probably can think of a million other features that could be in it, maybe things they're asking for, but that takes a long time. And it's like, why would, like, don't spend that extra time if you don't know, like, you're on the right track already. So all of this is to get to the idea that you're on the right track. And this could be applied to anything, right? The idea of, if you're opening a restaurant, it doesn't have to be technical, but if you're opening up a restaurant, it's like, what is the MVP of that? Is that a booth in the mall where people can test your product? Is that, helping at an event and having people walk around with a tray, right? So like, what is the minimum amount of people to experience the product they're making, right? And I think, and obviously it's easier in technology because you can do that with prototypes, you can do that with very early versions. And I think as it applies to any sort of store, it's, again, how do you prove that people want it, and using the, technology as a tool because it's cheaper to do a lot of those things. And the key thing on this stage, which a lot of people forget, is that what you really want to understand here is like watching and observing their behavior. And I think that's the key thing. There's a product I just recently sort of read a really great case study on called granola.ai. And they instead of sort of like having mass people grab it and start using it and getting their feedback. What they chose to do is actually do it very small and private and watch people. So they would actually bring people into their office, even though it was a technology tool. They would bring people into their office and watch them sort of fumble through the onboarding and how it all works. But then they could make quicker changes because they had more data. The problem is when you try and do it a little bit more arm's length, is that people won't give you that feedback that you want, and it might not be in a format. They'll just say few words, right? And you want to get sort of ideally past that. And that's you want sort of like the idea that you want technology to amplify the observation, but it doesn't replace it. So we talk a lot about things about doing things that don't scale really early on, and that's like if you have your first 5 customers, that you want to be talk to them as much as possible, right? And if you can, and you won't be able to do that once you reach 1,000 products, but early on, whatever that sort of key number is, that you're probably you might not be all the way there yet, even though they bought your product, and you want to understand what can you be doing better and why did they buy that product, and then amplify more of what they're telling you and how they're using the product, and then use that as a signal to go back and improve it. And especially true of the MVP level, because what you have is not a fully baked product, and just to know what to add to that, you sort of want to have that loop early. And this is sort of why you're getting into something where the product itself is going to lead into the growth of the next stage. Um, and this is sort of like a sequence. And I said that it's like a framework, and it's to make it a lot easier. And again, it's just to get really honest and factual of like, how can you take away that ambiguity and almost remove yourself out of the equation and sort of like get that true data. And I think it's to do that as cheaply as possible, but truthfully as possible. And this is where you can save a lot of sort of headache down the road, is if you apply some of these things really early. And so this is sort of like how it works out, which is, again, just for your purposes, stage 0 is like, how can I articulate this? Stage 1, is this idea confusing? So as you're telling other people, are they understanding it? Are they just sort of like scratching their head? And that's just something where you can redo over and over again and get that right before moving on to the next step. And this idea is like, okay, does this problem exist? Finding very real places where people are complaining about this. You could do this sort of analog way, which is like, I've seen people that go to universities or colleges and just grab people and give them a lollipop or something just to talk to them for a little bit. This takes a little bit longer than sort of what I did here, but the feedback is just as good. And then do they care? Do they care enough to make a minimal commitment, as such as like RSVPing or responding to your email or signing up for an early wait list? And then the next phase of that is like, well, you got that and you feel pretty good about it. Will they go the extra mile? Is their pain so important that they'll actually pay for it? And I think it's staging this out instead of jump. Some people want to jump right to the end here and do a lot, and just before they even know that people even want the product that they're selling. And it's the idea here is to try and save a lot of heartache by going through this process and having something that people actually want. And then again, at the end is, will they actually use it, right? They could pay for it, but once you have something in front of their hands that they actually can experience or use, then you'll know. And that's a whole other topic for another day. But when you get into the metrics of measuring that usage and looking for false signals there. And then just to remind that like the role of AI is really to sharpen your focus, not to sort of take away at it. We don't want it to invent demand, which I think a lot of people are doing sort of inappropriately, is getting too comfortable, and it's trying to appease you too much, and it certainly doesn't simulate real users. So the real answer is that a lot of this work is outside of the office or outside of your little bubble, and helping to identify those patterns. And for people that have products that are already in market, I think it's the same with new features, right? You can go through the same process of, does anybody really want your feature? Do they actually want to pay for it? And that can save a lot of time and even additional products or sub products. I think you can go through the same process, because I've seen people rush into this as well, and eventually sometimes it doesn't always end well. All right, and that's why I think it was really important to sort of do this topic, especially of a lot of the time that I've spent with really early stage companies in seeing how they sort of struggle through this process. And it's a tough one, because it's really easy to get like super excited about the problem you're solving, and I love that enthusiasm. This is why I do what I do. But the reality is, like, to get them to that part, is this is a really helpful way of thinking about it. And just to close, I think, validation is a posture toward reality, and it's really sort of like, how do you push away all of that, um, you know, the fakeness of friends, and what AI does, and how can you get to the real truth? But yeah, well, I'll leave it there for open up to questions, because I know there's a lot of people on the call.
Hey, thank you so much, Bernie. Honestly, like, I really loved your just the startup curve graphic. That was such a good way of showing like the how the enthusiasm flows. So right now we're gonna open up to questions. So if anybody has any questions for Bernie, please put them in the chat and I'll read them out. You can ask him really anything about today's presentation. If you have any questions that are specific to your own business, you can share them. I'm just not going to share like the business name or anything like too personal, but feel free to put in whatever questions you have. Okay, I have one from Mel. Says, do we need to worry about intellectual property when using AI as you're still developing your idea?
Um, there's a way to shut off the usage of it so that it's never there if it's something you're worried about. I mean, I haven't heard any cases where that's ever happened, but I know in big companies, when they still even allow you to use AI, and these are in public companies where anything they share might, jeopardize the stock price. What they basically get you to do is to go into your settings and turn off the sharing with the model. So you're not making the model any better, but you're getting sort of like your thing. But that's a pretty good way to prevent anything like that happening.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Okay.
everybody's businesses are a little bit different, so I'd be really interested to hear anybody who maybe has a unique a spin or type of market that they're wondering how, what type of techniques could be applied to their situation.
I'm curious about more about the market research and like getting more data from different industries. What have you found, especially working in an industry like tech, to be one of like the easier ways that you've been able to get data to see if your idea would work?
Yeah, and I find that there's some like AIs that are better at research than not, because you want to really avoid them just making things up, right? And I think there's products like Perplexity and Manus, which are two other AIs that we sort of use a lot for that type of research, and because they cite their sources well. But I think what's really important is to ask the right questions, right? Because I think the tendency is to just really see big numbers, right? Like if you have a product that's for like moms and you're like, how many moms are there, right? And it's sort of a false thing. So I think it needs a little bit more finding out how many people have that problem. And it's sometimes that like you have to ask AI the right questions for that, and it doesn't really know the answers. And I think that's sort of why I was alluding to the fact of like, if you can get another source, because they might, especially with things that are innovative, right? Or things that maybe you don't think exist. Because otherwise it's like the things that do exist and you're just like another burger joint. It's really
Hmm.
easy to get the data, right? You just look at what other burger joints are doing, and if you could be cheaper or a better product, then you should do a little bit better. What I think is the interesting part, and where the hard part is, like, I'm creating something that I don't think exists, and or doesn't exist in a certain way. And I think that makes the research a little bit tougher. And I think that's where you sort of ask those right questions, or go to sort of other sources, because you're not going to find, if it doesn't exist, sometimes you won't find any competitors, but you will find people complaining about that product, hopefully. Otherwise, maybe it's not that big a problem, right?
I have a great question from Chris, which is once you have a product, how do you recommend testing the product for MVP, especially in the cosmetic and food industry?
Yeah, I think consumables are tricky because you don't get the same metrics that you could if it was a digital product, right? Like if you released your website, you could find out how many people were on it, what country they were from. You don't get that part when somebody just bought your product, especially off the shelf. So what I recommend if anybody's doing in the consumer thing is that's why I said it's most important to get really involved with your first 5 customers. Don't sort of launch it right away. Just like do whatever you can. Think of any sort of creative way that you can to get their email and to book meetings with them. And it's hard, especially if you're shy or introverted, but I think it's the most important thing you'll do is really understanding from those people, how does it work? And I think the whole thing is anytime somebody buys something where it's transactional, what you're really, really focused on is the next buy. Them buying it really doesn't tell you anything, right? That they liked your packaging, they liked you, they liked your trade show booth, whatever it is. Like I think everyone's tried some product off the shelf once, maybe because of the packaging or something, and then you didn't like it, you never bought it again, right? So it's to get to that part and how do you undercover those things, which is really tough. It's an analog thing, but that's why I sort of really recommend doing things in low runs, right? Like, and if you can get to a trade show where you can talk to people as well, obviously you can have more of that personal relationship and sort of get that permission structure to have a relationship with them, get their email, get their phone number, whatever it is, and say, are you interested in helping us? And usually they are, because I think if they're buying at a trade show or something like that, then they're on the early adopter side, and I think it's really useful. And the other good thing I like about trade shows, and this is true of any networking event, is there's a really great way to refine your pitch, right? And I do that all the time still, right? You go to a thing and it's just to talk to people. You say how long it is, and you basically kind of give your first cut at it, and then they'll ask questions. And your job is to make them ask the least amount of questions by the time you're done, right? And if you could do that effectively, you're probably getting really, really good at your pitch. So, yeah, hope that answers that.
Yeah, that was perfect. That was a great answer. I really like trade shows is a great way because the people who are attending those know that this is often going to be like in the early stage. So it's the best time to ask all those questions of how they would use it. I have another question, which is, are there prompts that you use for AI that get a more accurate response to the validity of the product?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's like sort of an ongoing thing, and I actually followed the space quite closely. I think the AIs, as they continue to get better, their models change, and how you talk to it has to change, right? And I think the best, I mean, without sort of like, you know, just sort of throwing everything else I've sort of learned in the last little while, I think the most useful thing is really helping it help you. And by that, I mean, you say something that your objective is, and then you ask it to ask you any questions that will make its job easier. And I think that works across all of the platforms. And you can even just give it permission to give as many as you want. Ask me 20 questions, or just like give me as many things you need to understand this better. And that will help it understand it in a way that it makes sense for it, right? It's trying to help you. But a lot of people just sort of like don't do that, and they just take whatever it gets it. And I think that's part of it. But I think from a terms of validity of your product, that's part, it knows a lot, right? And then it might give you words to search for, which I think a lot of times, if we're doing truly innovative stuff, sometimes we're like articulating the problem is just as important as articulating the solution. You may not think of it in the same way or the words that other people use. And AI is great at helping you that out, which then you could go down that rabbit hole and finding it out, right?
I want to go back to how you were saying using the internet and like TikTok and Reddit to like find the pain points. I find that like that's something that I do where I will go and like r slash entrepreneurship, r slash business and just read like what are the topics that are coming up often? What are people complaining about? What are people in need of? So going into your industries and just putting in, like, I've gone into TikTok and put like coffee shop just to see what happens and what people are saying about it to kind of get an understanding of like there might be also something that is happening that's not even in our country, that's in Europe or Australia, that you can pull ideas from those people as well, so that, just because it's not in Northern Ontario doesn't mean it's not going to work. It just means it might not have been introduced to us yet. Or it's a problem that somewhere else they've solved it, but it's not come here yet. I
Yeah.
have a follow-up question from Chris. which is launching a business can be daunting at first from a knowledge perspective, but also from a financial perspective. How do you recommend limiting the financial burden other than MVP? Do you recommend on looking for an investor or just focus on keeping costs low and MVP to validate the business plan?
Yeah, I think those things go hand in hand, and I think it's like it's a lot harder to get investment than ever before. But I think they're looking for the same things. Like there is a lot of sort of investors that do pre-seed or angels that were like even at the concept level. But what they're looking for and what puts it over the edge is customer validation. Like if you said like, and this happens all the time in tech, and it happens a lot of other industries as well. But if you said I had this form on my website and I haven't even built the product yet, but I articulated it well, and 50,000 people signed up in 30 days. If like think about how impressive that sounds. If you had that, there are people willing to throw money at you. And that's what I'm saying that there's benefit to getting really, really good at this because that is the type of things that happen. And then the other things is like we've signed up for pre-orders. And you again you see those all the time on those not again I'm escaping me the name of it, but the idea of like the GoFundMe's, but the product ones, right? But those, I forget the name of it. It's um, but the
Kickstarter.
Kickstarter, yeah, like the
Yeah.
Kickstarters of the world, right? That's a sort of a great idea that shows that thing. The challenge with that is that like sometimes they go too cheap and they basically have to spend a year or two submitting 50,000 orders, right? It went sort of too well. But I think from MBT standpoint, it's like as early as you can get that market validation and do it in some numbers and show that you're really, and again, if you get people to pay, that's like the best thing ever. If you can do that really cheaply, the investors understand that if the only thing you need is money to get to the next level, then that's what will kind of give you. It's just like they will be able to do that math really quickly. Again, I had 50,000 people signed up, and then out of those 50,000 people, 10,000 of them bought. Like think of how impressive that says. And I'm just saying very lightly, that's I could walk into a pitch, they wouldn't even care what product I made. If I had those kind of stats, they'd be like, yeah, sure, show me just do you accept Visa or check, right? Like, and that's sort of the idea. But I think so coming back to sort of like how do you reduce it? Again, using a lot of these tools to guess MVP something as much as possible, get that early validation without spending a lot. If you have to keep your job, you do it. If you have to get it, I think the time where you sort of want to think about investment is when you just can't do it anymore and you're at the breaking point, right? You need to leave your job or you need something, right? But a machine or something in order to deliver your product.
Yeah, and I find the demand piece that you touched on is really huge because it's like sometimes we have these great ideas for a business, but we haven't checked if there's even a demand. And it's something you said earlier, making up the demand. Like we just kind of say like, oh, they need this. Oh, they need this. Like, oh, we just don't have this in this neighborhood, so therefore it will absolutely be
Yeah.
successful. But you want to check that that demand actually does exist before you get started. And I've told that to some of our clients before, like if they're building a business around a service that is really high in demand, that like that often they'll have wait lists and such. I'll say like start your wait list now before you even have like your doors open, because then you'll build up that list. And then when you do open your doors, you already have a list of clients. You already have people who are willing and have their foot in the door. So you don't have to open your doors and then chase people. You can open your doors and have, 50 people already standing at your front door waiting for your service. So it really like pushes it. And then to bring that to investors, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah,
It's
and
hard to say no because it's proof. It's proof that this idea is good and there's a demand and it's answering some kind of need or pain point that people are experiencing.
yeah, and I think that's why I think is important sequentially, right? Because like you said, like the first step is like a lot of people think their problem, everyone has it, and some people are right, some people are wrong, right? But you want to figure that
Mhm.
out as first as possible, and sort of like usually if it's something personal to you, and I think that's the best way to start a business, something bugs you if you're genuinely curious and you want to solve that problem, and that's probably things that are coming into your feed already because of things you do, like if you're thinking about cooking and that's your that kind of thing, and there's a problem you think to solve there, guaranteed you're probably getting a lot of that feedback. You can check those comments, so that's starting to say okay, there is demand, right? And then it's like go to, is there more demand in something I could reach, right? My country, my region, or whatever. And so kind of what you were saying is like, yeah, find out there's lots and lots of demand. But
Mhm.
then that doesn't end there because you could all those can be true, right? You can have tons of demand. Everyone thinks it's a problem. Everyone thinks your solution's great. but they don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah.
problem you see where like somebody who's already opened up their store, they already paid their 4 or 5 year lease, and people come in and they don't buy anything. So
Yeah.
it's like it's really important to kind of go through all of those things, like prove the demand, and then prove if people will pay for it, right? Well, and then the step before that is the early commitment, which is the wait list. But you don't want to go right from wait list to sell the farm and sort of do everything and open up the restaurant. Like it's like no, like in a very micro way, will they pay for it? And then again, will they pay for it and will they use it? That's a separate thing, right?
Yeah.
People, I mean,
Yeah.
you see this a lot in like the mobile gaming industry where people use a game for 2 days and they drop. Like they never use it again. And it's all about is like how can you get people to use things as long as possible? And to coming back to that cosmetic industry is like that's an interesting thing too. Your whole job is to get the next purchase, not the first one. The first one is key, but you want them to buy again. And if they don't, you got to go back and recycle and figure out why are they not buying again? What is wrong in the loop? Yeah,
That's something that is going to be really great. In a few weeks, we have an event, Homegrown Ventures, and one of the speakers is Heather Knight, who does product design. And she talks about that, like how to test out your product. And she talks, we have a little interview clip that's going to come out soon. It's just fun because it's so relevant, where she talks about like, look at how you use a product, look at the issues like personally that you're running into, and how can they be fixed. It's something that there's this artist, Robert Pattinson, he's a Canadian like wildlife painter, and he says he only paints things that come from something real, that come from his backyard, something that he encountered in real life, because he's like anything good should come from within. It should have a piece of you so that you have that emotional connection to it, and it makes it so much more special. Like don't start a business just to start a business. Start a business with something that you actually believe in, because that'll help carry that. And people will see that passion as well. They'll see that this isn't just another cookie cutter thing that you slapped on and put together. It's something that came from a problem that you experienced.
yeah,
I have another question. How can we make sure that customers are ready to pay when the product follows a freemium model?
yeah. I mean, um, I think most freemium models still there's a usually another there's a paid option, right? You start with freemium as a teaser, so you still at some point need to get them to pay, right? And I think some of these things are strategies that are great at the beginning, but they're you would change them later, right? And I think early on, like even if you can get somebody to pay a very small amount, not to say like later you could do that, but I think it's the same sort of idea, right? Because I think you can't have a sustainable business if everyone's on for free and there's no business model, right? There are times that you can do that, but then you have to be really good at all those other pieces and showing that demand, and then it becomes a velocity game. And you see this of a lot of these companies where you're like, I haven't paid once for Facebook early, or what, that's a bad example because they have an advertising model, but they didn't at the beginning, right? And there's a lot of things where you're like, how do they even we're using this all the time and like no money changes hands. Well, that's okay. The investors are behind because they know once they have 2 million users or 2 billion users, that then they could turn on the costing and then get a good percentage of those too. But I think freemium is a great way to sort of validate a model. But again, you still want to find those value things. And part of it is like if you can do that quickly, you can get a lot of market feedback, right? You can get a lot of people if it's something technical that you can put a lot of metrics behind it, you're really studying those metrics. And so even if they're free, you could be failing. And by that, I mean, you really want to study their daily active usage, their monthly active users, whatever's sort of important for your product. But if you're tracking that and you want to make sure that they don't drop off, even as free users, because once you have free users that are very sticky, they don't leave the product and they're always on, even months ahead, and they're using it daily or whatever sort of is appropriate for that product, that's a pretty good signal. That means if it went away, would it matter? And then it's about finding out is the pain enough that they would pay for, and then just how much. And then I think part and parcel of that, I think for some of the other types of businesses is thinking about, you might have demand, you might have proved that they will pay for it, but it still has to work for the economics of the business, right? Can you generate enough business with this idea? And this is again another topic, but I think you want to be able to get to that part smoothly, where you sort of like, you just can't make a living off this, and it's always going to be a hobby, right? That can happen, and those are fun too. But it's like that's where the market research meets the other part. But if you don't have those other pieces that we talked about today, it's going to make market research really, really difficult, and it's going to give you a lot of false signals. You're going to be like, yeah, their mom market's huge, right? There's a lot of moms, and you're like, if I just get 1% of every mom, and like the world just doesn't work like that, and neither do the investors. If they see that on a pitch deck, they run, right? They just don't believe that stuff. So they want to see real traction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't just say like Sudbury has a population of this many francophones, so obviously they're all going to buy into it. It's like, no, you have to go more in depth than that to really get into like a niche demographic that really needs the demand, and then you'll have a much more valid and better market research and something that's just, it shows that you didn't just pick a number and went with it. You dug in, you saw what they needed, what are their demographics. You have to look at, like if we go back to selling to moms, like they all have different incomes. So they're all willing to spend a very different amount of money. They have, some of them have more kids, so they have less time or they're running around more. So their problems are different, like across the board. You can't treat like one demographic as like a bubble. It has to be like broken down into tiers, and then they'll all interact with the product very differently, right? And then we can also, what else? Speaking about a little bit the financial side of how much money would you say, like for a startup, like should invest in putting towards the market research?
Um, yeah, early
Like
on, I
maybe
think
like a
it's like
percentage? Hmm.
of money, you mean like of capital or
Yeah,
time?
like
Like,
I guess both, because I feel like there's so many steps to having a startup, and we're all trying to figure out, how much time you spend on this, how much money do you spend on this? What do you think like a percentage of your market research funding should be spent there?
yeah, I mean, ideally, like I typically have never really spent money on market research if we can avoid it, because I think those things are available. But I think it's as a percentage of time, it's great really early or sort of as you enter new markets. And I think it's nice knowing, even if it's not your first couple of years, that there is a global market for it. It just may change how you think differently. And it's the idea of sort of thinking big, right? Even if you're like, okay, well, we're going to start in Sudbury or whatever. Again, with some digital products, like it's bigger. The world's your landscape, right? But it's sometimes, again, if you're opening a restaurant, it's difficult to think globally. But sometimes you can think, oh, well, what if I opened up another one? Like, what can I systemize the processes in here, right? Can I do those types of things? And so I think that makes that important. But I think overall, like it's a very key element is like finding out there is demand and there is market. But like those two aren't the same thing. Just because there's market doesn't mean there's demand, right? It just means that you have the possibility of it and that you should go try. Right? I think that makes sense.
No, yeah, absolutely. Okay, we got another 5 minutes to this call. So if anybody has any more questions, drop them down now before it's too late. After this presentation, I'm also going to be sending everybody the notes and we're going to have a little survey. So if you enjoyed it, please tell us. If there's something that we can improve on, tell us that too. And then you'll also get the link to the YouTube video so that if you want to go back and be like, oh, Bernie said something really, really good about this, I just don't quite remember, you can go back in the video and go find like exactly what you're looking for. You could also feel free to connect with him. I can always share his contact, and you can check him out with the incubator program as a mentor. So if you're interested in working with Bernie, there are opportunities as he's a mentor with the business incubator program and NORCAT. So there are ways to ask more questions and get more out of him. I mean, Bernie, you have so much experience. You've worked with so many different companies. It's like, I don't know, like I guess I'm so used to working with companies that have like one business or they've worked kind of like on one thing. So to see somebody who's worked on so many different projects across the year is always really fun because it's like you didn't just dip your toes in one thing. You saw so many different challenges and successes and pain points and stories and accomplishments that there's so much that you can get out of, just talking to Bernie. So again,
Yeah.
if you have any more questions, put them in now.
And I think it's an interesting part about mentorship. And I've been doing this mentorship for a long time, almost like probably about half of my career. So I've been a NORCAT mentor for over, I think, 15 years now, and at least incubator for, I think, 2 or 3 years. And it's, to
Wow.
me, it's like it's rebirthing because I'm hearing all of those new businesses as well. And I'm sort of like living through their eyes and helping with the startups again. And I have a personal attachment to a lot of them where it's like feels like, it's mine as well too. So I'm going through that process as an ongoing basis all the time. Even though I've sort of done bigger things in the past, it's the idea is that I'm still going through it with all of these new people, and I have been over these years. So I have a lot of the experience of things that I've tried with a lot of industries that were foreign to me, but a lot of these principles still work all the way across.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I don't know if we'll get any more questions. I think you just covered like everything we
All
could.
good.
So we're gonna wrap up there. Like I said, you're all gonna get a little post-webinar follow-up. And don't forget, we have more webinars coming in the year. Like I think I have the next 4 months of webinars are all on our website, and we're only going to be adding more. So make sure you keep an eye out. There's a lot of really good topics, whether you're just starting out or you're expanding or you just kind of like want to refresh some knowledge. Come on over, come find out more. And like I said, we do free consultations. So if you want to have a one-on-one with us, you want to get some more information out of us, you can for free and do it virtually where you don't even have to deal with the gross winter weather, you know? Okay, so with that, oh, we got one left. I'm gonna let this one question slip in and then we're
Sure.
gonna call it. When you have more business ideas that time and money, how do you decide which one to pursue?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. I think some of it's like I like ideas that are my own problem to solve. Those are the ones that like I go for first, even though there's probably other things like I see people struggle just in public and I'm like, it would be better if you could do that, like or whatever it is. And that those ones are sort of get second fiddle to the ones that I actually have. And I mean that's my own personal thing. But I've sort of like had to adopt myself and get really, really good at building systems so that I can start up companies really quickly and validate them really quickly, get to them a place where other people could even run them at that point, right? They have enough of me in them that I don't have to run them anymore. And I can just be an owner of that. And I can go rinse and repeat and do that very effectively. So that gets very efficient for me, where I don't have that sort of same early stress and battle as I would have had I been really green early on in my career. And that's a lot of the things I'm thinking about from the perspective is like how to think about your businesses in the terms of systems and how you can set it up where like whatever you're doing now doesn't necessarily going to be what you're going to do forever. It could be, but the chances like that's why go through it, go through the exercises and learn as much as you can so that the next one is even easier.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those last words of wisdom. With that, I'm going to let you all go back to your day. Thank you so much for attending. Love that you guys were here, and we'll see you at the next one. And thanks again, Bernie, for taking time out of your day to be here and present to us.
Thanks for all the great questions.
Thank you, and have a great day, everyone.